Dogman versus Hatman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Okay, man, I got a story for you that you aren't going to be able to explain away so easily. I think the world is cracking apart, and I think that's where all the weirdness comes from. I don't mean ordinary weirdness. I mean the kind of weirdness your channel is supposedly about. People call them cryptids because they don't understand the word monster was fine in the first place. These are not undiscovered species. These are monsters that might literally come from nightmares. But wherever they hail from, it's not the same place as lions and tigers and bears, trust me. Once you realize the Dogman is not an animal like a squirrel, then you also realize it has more to do with the shadow people than it does with normal wolves and dogs, or humans for that matter. The way I see it, Bigfoot and aliens have more in common with ghosts than they do with any kind of creature that you'd find in the Philadelphia Zoo. I have had a few experiences, and I'm going to rattle a couple of them off for you in this email so that you can understand where I'm coming from and why I'm saying these things that I'm saying. When I was a kid, I was bothered by a shadow man. He would come out of the closet in my room and he would stare at me. I could sometimes see eyes in the shadows. I mean, there was no shadow where the eyes would have been, if that makes sense. As though someone flat with the eye holes cut out was casting that shadow. Usually I couldn't move when I was looking at him, but there were a few times when I could turn my head, and then I saw something dark with a long snout staring in through the window, looking at that same shadow man I was looking at. Another time I remember I got up and ran out of the room to my parents' room, so obviously my sightings of the shadow man did not always come with sleep paralysis. As I got older, I heard people start talking about the Hat Man, and the next time I saw the shadow man, I noticed he had a wide-brimmed hat, sort of like a cowboy's hat. While it was happening, I felt like I remembered that he had always had a hat on, but when I think back on it, I'm not so sure. Did he actually have the hat on before I had heard of the Hat Man? Had I just not noticed? I don't know, but he always had the hat on every time after that. So I had seen the Hat Man for a long time, before I ever saw my first Dogman. I only saw Dogman in my last 2 years of living at home with my parents in New Ringgold, Pennsylvania. It's a small town, but it's surrounded by some of the most awesome forest land anywhere. That was where I spent as much of my time as I could, since I was old enough to travel around on my own. Instead of going home after school, I often would walk around in the woods for as long as I thought I could get away with before heading home for dinner. I even used to do my homework out in those trees, so I got to see a lot of strange stuff. Well, maybe not a lot, but a lot more than I was led to believe was out there by my science teachers. I know you want to hear about the Dogman, and yes, I did have some experience with him that I am leading up to. I'm hoping you'll appreciate that to me, all this stuff was sort of combined into one thing. It all felt like it was related, or as I said before, possibly from another kind of place. Another dimension, another world, another reality. A window world? I don't really know what I'm saying, but I'm certain in my gut that something like that was what was going on. One afternoon, I saw a glowing ball of light in the woods, and when I tried to follow it, the light always seemed to stay at the exact same distance from me. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It made me very confused. But it was also kind of cool to see something that looked so impossible. I figured it was some sort of optical illusion, and I tried to forget about it. But then another day, I was taking my extra long scenic route home, walking through the woods, with my friend we called Turtle for some reason, and we both saw that same kind of light all over again. I had told all my friends about that glowing ball of light, which I could never get any closer to, so Turtle was excited to get to see it for himself. We both immediately set off running toward the glowing ball, but it seemed that This time we had no problem getting nearer to it. It smelled truly bad around that light, and we both felt nauseous. Then the light emitted this sort of heavy sigh or sound just like that, and rose off the forest floor and started floating away. As it did so, we could hear leaves crunching, as though a large man were walking away on autumn leaves. First of all, it was spring, and second of all, we could see nothing making impressions in the tall grass. We could hear someone walking, but all we saw was a glowing floating ball. Explain that one to me if you can. So I got in the habit of getting home before sundown, after I started to see what seemed to be that same Hat Man who used to visit me in my bedroom at night. He was harder to make out in the woods, because there are no straight flat surfaces in there. When the Hat Man moves over trees, he moves in curves, not in straight lines. It's a lot harder to make out his form much of the time. He can get much taller out there in the woods though. He isn't limited by the size of your room or the height of your ceiling. I always saw him as a living shadow. I did not see him as an invisible being casting a shadow. I assumed the shadow itself was alive. And when I saw that shadow moving around independently in those woods, I knew it was time to go home. I saw him possibly 7 or 8 times out there, and in spite of its apparently human form, I began to think of it as some kind of nocturnal forest creature. And then came the evening when I woke up in the woods, having realized that I had fallen asleep. It was already pretty dark, and I was in danger of encountering the Hat Man again. I have nightmares that start this way, waking up at night in the woods, knowing I have a long way to go before I'm home, knowing I'm on the turf of some pretty dark things that like to hide and creep around in the night. I was thinking so much about the Shadow Man that it was all I had on my mind. Granted, he is a threat, but so is tripping over my own feet. So are cougars, you know what I mean? The Shadow Man had not ever physically attacked me, although I had heard stories from some other people I knew, who he also paid house calls to. I was devoting too much fear to the Shadow Man, and it caused me to get careless and walk right up to within 15 feet of a dog-headed hairy humanoid with glowing eyes. That SOB was huge, and my eyes teared up, making it hard to see. I thought it was a space alien. Those eyes were glowing so bright. I don't really know if it was eye shine, or if it was actual internal lighting inside those eyes, but in either case, it made that thing look like it came from another world. Maybe it really did, just not a world from outer space. I froze in place and I stared. Here was a thick-armed, thick-legged man, muscles on top of his muscles, and thick fur on top of all that, with a long canine snout and the biggest fangs I'd ever seen. The paws were claws. He looked like the most formidable kind of monster that had ever lived, and he was staring back at... Well, actually, he was looking past me, and above me. I was looking at it, but it didn't seem to even care that I was there. Was this a holographic projection or a residual haunting? Why wasn't it looking at me, but instead behind me? Instinctively, I turned around, and there I saw some kind of shadows being cast in the tops of the trees. All of these dark spots moving around all over these many branches. What was that? Could it be bats taking off in flight? I stared harder and realized that whatever this was, it was what had seemed so interesting to the Dogman. This was why it wasn't even looking at me. The shadows coalesced and swarmed over my body, covering me completely, and I no longer was any place at all. I felt like I was swimming in black liquid oxygen for a few seconds, and then the moment passed, and with a loud, painful popping sound in my ears, I was back there where I had been in the dark forest. Only now the moving shadows were gone from in front of me. Sounds of a large animal in agony rang out behind, and I turned to see the strangest battle I hope to ever see. The dog-headed man was battling against an opponent who seemed to disobey the laws of physics by his very nature. I saw the shadow move as though it were punching a tree, and at the same moment, the dogman flew backward as though he had been pummeled on his very long jaw. My brain and my eyes were confused. That made it seem as though the shadow were, in fact, merely the shadow of an invisible being. Another time, the furious and increasingly out-of-control dogman grabbed some bark off a tree that the shadow had been cast upon, and in so doing, he somehow now had a grip on the shadow itself, flinging the darkness back and forth into rocks and tree trunks. The upright canine seemed to be out to destroy whatever the Hat Man actually was. How could he seem to have an invisible physical presence and at the same time seem to be a living shadow? There were things happening that seemed to contradict everything that had happened before. It was like a series of different laws of nature were continually being deposed from the throne and replaced by another set which made even less sense than before. My only guess is that I was seeing multiple dimensions from the point of view of someone trapped in 3 dimensions, or however many our world has. Maybe if a physicist or a mathematician had been there with me on that night, he or she might have gotten some great insights from what we were observing. But as it went down, I was alone by myself, and when the 2 impossible men battled away from the direction I needed to go in, I took off running toward my parents' home. When I got there, I snuck in the house, ran up to my room, and there was some movie on the TV about the world cracking apart. That's where I got that idea. Reality itself is breaking up, like ice, and things from these other realities sometimes come on over into where we live. At least that's sort of a way to explain it. I mean, it's probably an 8 or 12-dimensional kind of a thing, so it probably can't be fully explained by a guy like me who is only in 3D, not 9 or 10D. And so you see, this is why Dr. Jeff Meldrum won't come to my birthday parties. It's because I don't think cryptids are relic hominids at all. I think they're creatures so different from us that they may as well be actually magic or supernatural. And that's about the closest I could come to an explanation for what happened on the day that I saw the battle between Dogman versus Hat Man. CS, I must confess, we feel blessed with thankfulness. Please join me in thanking today's executive producers, CS, one of the greatest supporters our show and channel could ever have. If not for CS, we'd have already been off the air, and that's not hyperbole. She donates to us using the thanks button under our videos, and she belongs to our channel members club too, so she gets all our perks. Here to fill in the deets is international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.